Well, I think all the rest of them will show. But this is on.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to call this budget workshop of the Mojave County Supervisors to order. We're going to start out and hand it over to County Manager Sam Elters. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman and board members, and welcome to the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget workshop. Thank you for the opportunity to serve you and the residents of Mojave County in this capacity. And let me start by saying that it is my job and my duty, along with staff, to present you with the facts as we know them in order for you to make an informed decision related to this budget and all other matters. About this time last year, during our budget cycle, financial experts were telling us high inflation would be transitory. I think you would agree they were wrong. Inflation has been not only long-lasting, but also very impactful. It has reduced our purchasing power and devalued our county resources. As a result, the cost of operating county government and delivering county services has increased substantially this year and has caused a budget deficit, a gap between revenues and expenditure. Our options are increasing revenue or decreasing expenditures. As we contemplate these options, I urge the board to remember that our employees are our most valuable asset. We need to recruit and retain them. Additionally, please remember that we planned conservatively for the current fiscal year last year, but here we are still facing a sizable budget deficit. Because of inflation, our revenues are not keeping up with the cost to operate the county and provide needed services to county residents. We believe that trend will continue through and beyond next year. We additionally believe, for the record, that the funding deficit we face this year will likely grow and could double or even triple next year as we plan for FY25. Please note, the FY24 fiscal year, that's this coming fiscal year that we're planning for, the budget contains in it one-time federal revenues, as you know, called Local Assistance Fund, which will not be available in FY25. We believe we are approaching a pivotal point regarding county financial stability and sustainability, and need to take steps this year that are designed to produce diverse and stable revenues. We truly need visionary and long-term solutions. Short of that, we anticipate facing larger funding deficit next year as we plan for the FY25, which will border on financial crisis. I sincerely thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you and to be factual and candid and realistic. I will turn the budget presentation over to Luke Mournian, Mohave County Chief Financial Officer, and his team to walk the board through the budget. We're here to answer any questions, take directions, and work with you toward adopting a final budget in July. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Elters. Good morning, Chairman and board members. Before I get started, I would like to thank each of you for your input and your collaboration, and for the opportunity to discuss Mohave County's FY24 preliminary budget with you this morning. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the directors, the elected officials, and staff who have all contributed to the proposal we bring before you today. This truly is a team effort each year, and I would like to thank you all for the effort and care that went into your submitted budgets. Lastly, but certainly not least, I would like to thank all of my staff, but most especially these two right here, Sonia Jaramillo and Judy Toledo, for their tireless efforts. They've put in long hours, nights, and weekends over the last few months, and somehow managed to stay upbeat through it all. I just want you to know I'm exceptionally blessed to have you both on my staff. As Sam mentioned, we do have a challenging path ahead of us leading up to final adoption of the FY 2024 budget. Inflation has had more of an impact than anyone thought possible a year ago. And as we meet and discuss this morning, the Federal Reserve Committee is also meeting, and most analysts expect another quarter-point interest rate hike to come out of that meeting. That would be the 10th rate hike since March of last year. My goal today is to present a factual and comprehensive overview of the proposed FY24 budget, including a summary of the numerous initiatives and capital requests contained within it. I will also be highlighting several pieces of information that we received after your budget books were published. Board members, please do not hesitate to stop me and ask questions as I move through the presentation. My goal is to provide relevant information to answer your questions as you deliberate on the interests and the future of Mohave County. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. As we move through this presentation, I'm going to just give an overview of the budget, summarize the new initiatives and the capital requests, talk a little bit about our general fund balance, present, again, a summary and some potential options, go over the remaining timeline leading up to final adoption, and then I'll conclude. As Sam mentioned, we do have challenges, we do have some opportunities in front of us with this budget. The cost of doing business continues to go up. We do anticipate further economic slowdown through the next year. The state has indicated that while there still will be growth in state shared revenues, the rate of growth is slowing, and that will affect our VLT and state shared sales tax revenues. We have two issues facing the county that are very much in consideration throughout this budget, and those are the shortfall in revenues. We have an approximate $4 million deficit right now, and then the difficulties in recruiting and retaining our valued employees. We do have a need to move away from a single-year focus and to begin planning longer term. That is needed in order to allow the county to weather fluctuations in the broad economy. We also have opportunities to improve how our employees are compensated and recognized for their efforts, and those include both pay and non-pay based proposals. So first of all, compensation. We have three primary initiatives included in this budget proposal. The first is a request to fully fund the PTO buyback policy that the board adopted last fall, and that comes with it a price tag of about $1.1 million to the general fund. There's another $750,000 or so that would affect other funds, but not general fund. We're also requesting revision to the salary ranges as they exist today. That would be an addition of 3 steps on the top of each range. So currently we have a maximum number of 16 steps that would move that to 19 steps in a range. And then lastly, we're asking for revisions to the PTO accrual rates. This has a price tag of about $288,000 to the general fund. We did do a bit of analysis because we currently have 2 employee groups, the employees hired before January 1st, 2016, and the employees hired after. And so when we look at PTO usage rates, the employee group after 2016, which is who would be affected by these revisions to the accruals, their usage is about 70% annually over the last 5 years. So of the hours that they accrue, they use 70% of it in any given year. Compared to the pre-2016 employment group, their usage rate is upwards of 90% over that same 5-year span. And I do want to remind the board that although the value of those additional hours accrued to the general fund is about $288,000, or excuse me, the value is estimated at $500,000 across all funds. The actual expense that may be incurred is only about $288,000. Next, we have a proposal from our sheriff. He was before you a few board meetings ago presenting, but this has a price tag of about $1.1 million for the sheriff and the jail, the adult detention facility. It affects roughly, there's a typo here, it's 1.5 million, I apologize for that. It affects roughly 200 employees. Also, along with that is a proposal from juvenile detention that would be needed in order to keep pace with the starting salaries in the sheriff's office and the jail if that initiative is approved. And that would affect 19 juvenile detention officers. Both of these initiatives are meant to provide competitive starting salaries and also move employees through the salary range at an accelerated pace. The 24 budget also includes carryover of several capital projects, animal shelter, the historic courthouse remodel, the legal services center, the jail reach out reentry, and the county morgue. And some of those are scheduled to be completed next year. Some of them have a longer construction build process and would not finish until FY '25. On the revenue side, we are looking, projecting vehicle license tax revenue the same as the current fiscal year, and projecting 2% growth for state shared sales tax. We've also adjusted the delinquent tax collections downward by about $1.5 million, and that is because when I look back in the last several years, budget versus actual revenue coming in for the general fund, the budgeted revenue was way out of line with what was actually being collected. And so I want to make sure that we have a true picture of where we're at. And so what this will do, it will align our 24 revenues with the actual amount that has been collected the past several years. The budget as it is before you today with that $4 million deficit assumes that the tax rates do not change. So any increase in the tax rate would reduce the $4 million deficit. Earlier this year, the board requested us to incorporate new metrics into our budget process. And as we've discussed before, we requested a breakdown of services from each department. The thought process behind that was that FY24 budget would establish a baseline, and then moving forward in future years, we will incorporate a comparison to that baseline as we move forward with the budget. So we will be asking departments next year if there is any sort of increase in the services that they, and the funds that they're requesting that will be justified or need to be justified by a comparison to that baseline. As Manager Elters mentioned, we are looking ahead to next year and projecting a much larger deficit. There's $8 million of the local assistance funding included in the FY24 budget that won't be available next year. And so if all else remains equal, expenses don't increase further, revenues don't increase further, we will be looking at a $12 million deficit as we go into FY25. And I've put on the screen there the equivalent property tax rate increases that would be needed to cover those deficits. So again, as we look ahead, we have to recognize that one-time revenues are not a sustainable approach to balancing our budget. We do need long-term solutions, and we need consistent and diverse recurring revenues. We've listed the 4 primary options for generating revenue there. I will just say that should we have a recession, state shared sales tax is certainly very much susceptible to the fluctuations in the economy. Increases in property taxes really just increases the county's concentration risk because we already rely so heavily on property taxes. A county excise tax would spread the tax burden more equally, not just affect property owners, but also out-of-state visitors, pass-through visitors, non-county residents. And then there is always the option of formation of certain special taxing districts, although that is a longer, more involved process, so not really a short-term solution. Looking at all of the new initiatives and capital requests, as it affects the general fund, we have new initiatives totaling about $3.3 million. That does include the sheriff's office and the juvenile detention facility, so about $2 million of that is those 2 initiatives. Capital requests total roughly $2 million, and the net FTE addition is just 2 full-time equivalent. That is not counting the sheriff's salary initiative, which actually gives back quite a few positions between the sheriff's office and the jail. If we compare this to last year, the total new initiatives last year was about 1.7 million, and capital was about 1.8 million. And so they're relatively in line once you back out that sheriff's salary initiative. Again, we included new initiatives In the budget, if they meted one of these criteria on the screen, we did what we could to keep new initiatives budget neutral, negotiating with departments and proposing alternative solutions. But there are significant effects of inflation and costs going up, levels of service that need to be provided increasing as the county's population grows, and so a lot of those were also driving whether or not initiatives were included in the proposed budget. So starting with the Sheriff's Office, we do have that salary initiative totaling about 1.5 million. There are also initiatives related to personnel, equipment, and training. There's a request for an increased transfer from the general fund for the Waterways Division, and there are capital requests that total about 100,000 to the general fund, 400,000 to non-general or grant funds. On the salary side, the sheriff has expressed the critical need that he is facing to compete with neighboring agencies and employers. He has critical staffing levels at the adult detention facility. He's seen an increased rate of separation of his sworn officers, high vacancy levels, and that has led to a substantial increase in overtime in order to maintain proper staffing. And while that mandatory overtime has allowed him to meet those staffing requirements, it is definitely not a sustainable solution, and it's a contributing factor in burnout and high turnover. As I mentioned before, the request is to provide competitive starting salaries that are on par with the neighboring agencies, as well as to move the employees through the salary range at an accelerated pace. There's also a non-general fund request to reclassify a law librarian from range 10 to range 11 as an office specialist. It's a 5% increase, and it's funded through the commissary fund. The sheriff also is requesting about $76,000 increase in training and travel expenses. There's a wide variety of courses and classes that go into this, all intended to better equip his staff to perform their jobs. We also have a request for $50,000 to fund a new volunteer equipment fund. This is to equip volunteers in the sheriff's posse, boating safety, search and rescue. Right now, they often are required to come out of pocket and buy their own equipment. The sheriff relies on many volunteers to provide services, and so this request would allow him to provide equipment for them. There's also some public safety equipment that is budgeted, a tranquilizer, immobilization device for the range officer. There's computer and phone for detective, and there is software for basically for cracking passwords on cell phones that are taken in investigations. The sheriff has noted that that is a means of providing evidence that they use quite frequently in homicide and child exploitation investigations. So a pretty important piece of software. There's also an upgrade to the state link database, and that is a mandate from the federal government that the sheriff's office upgrade that link. On the Homeland Security grant, there is actually a request for a general fund transfer of $15,000 because the grant money cannot be used to cover the annual maintenance costs on the automatic license plate readers that were purchased last year. So that's just a transfer request from the general fund. On the capital side, roughly $100,000 in requests. There's a picture there on your screen of drone that the sheriff is requesting. This is to be used for crime scene documentation, critical incidents, missing person assistance, that sort of thing. They're also requesting a 3D Matterport camera. This is a camera that can be set up in a crime scene and make a 3D image of the scene. So very useful both in indoor and outdoor crime scenes. And then the largest request is about $81,000, and that's to upgrade the autopilot system on one of the sheriff's aircraft. Non-general fund capital requests total about $400,000. There's 2 replacement vehicles, and there is a $257,000 request through the 911 grant funding to upgrade the last 3 consoles in the 911 call center. That would complete the upgrade and bring all of those consoles up to upgraded capabilities. And then lastly, there is a $20,000 request for 2 intoxilizer units. These are being recommended by ADOT to replace the outdated units that are currently in service. Moving on to the Board of Supervisors, we have requests from 2 districts, from District 4 and District 5, for merit-based salary increases. And I'll just note that approval of these initiatives would bring all of the appointed admin or executive assistant hourly salaries within 5% of each other. As I mentioned before, general administration, we're requesting revision to the current salary schedule. And along with that, we're requesting to place 60 longtime employees directly on step within their existing ranges. The estimated price tag for that is about $250,000. And what that will do is really just allow us to retain some of the longest tenured employees in the county and provide them with room to grow with the county for another several years. As I mentioned, 3 additional steps. So with the 3% annual raises, 3 more years of growth where they can continue to perform, but also continue to be rewarded for that performance. The revision to the PTO accruals, this really consolidates. Right now we have 5 different accrual tiers based on years of service. This takes the bottom 2 tiers, 0 to 2 years, 2 to 4 years, consolidates them into 1 accrual tier with the same accrual rate. It would be an increased accrual rate. This will address the problem that we have heard from many departments, that when employees are hired in, they accrue PTO so slowly that if they get sick, if a child gets sick, they're taking time off without pay. It would also advance them roughly 6 pay periods worth of PTO upon hire, and then they wouldn't accrue through that first 6 pay periods, but they would have it there in case something did happen and they needed to take time off. One thing I do want to point out, that after we published the preliminary budget, we did hear from CSA of an increase that will be coming down to all the counties. It's $33,000 increase. We will include this in the tentative budget. I'll point out some other bits of information we received after the budget was published that will also be included in the tentative. But this is broken out. $23,000 is an increase in service fees for each county. Right now, CSA charges based on a population-based fee. This moves to an equal share amongst all the 15 counties. And then there is a $10,000 increase related to a request to convert the strategic initiatives consultant to a director position. That's Brandon Nee, most of you are familiar with, I'm sure, and that's moving him from a part-time to a full-time position. For the county attorney, we have a one-time general fund transfer request of $136,000. This is due to they were notified of a reduction in their VOCA funding for the coming year. It's the final year of a 3-year grant, but this transfer will allow them to continue to provide the victims' rights services. That grant is based on the federal fiscal year, and so what's included in this request is just 9 months of our FY24 budget. Moving on to the courts, we have general fund initiatives that net out to about $725,000 and grant and fee fund requests that net to $13,000. In the Superior Court, we have a number of reclassifications. The court administrator from range 29 to 31, moving an administrative program specialist from range 15 to range 20. This does net a savings of $19,000 because the predecessor employee that vacated that position was budgeted and paid at a higher rate. And there's also requests to reclassify a security manager and a security assistant. And then other personnel related initiatives is to move a judicial assistant to the general fund at a cost of $35,000 to the general fund. That was a split funded position with fill the gap funds. There is also a request to create a progression series for the bailiffs. It would be budget neutral for FY24. There's no current bailiffs employed that meet the 4-year requirement that they would need to progress to the bailiff 2 level in that series. We also have a request for a new court IT systems analyst position. This is fee and grant funded. It also is funded through freezing a automation field trainer position and through operating transfers from the field trainer fund and the court improvement fund. There's also a request for moving the CASA program assistant and program coordinator positions from range 6 to 8 and range 8 to 10. And the funding for that is 85% grant funding and then 15% funding from the court automation fund contingency. Capital requests of about $100,000 related to the Bullhead City and North Canyon facilities and an annual server refresh. Probation is requesting adjustments to the juvenile detention officers. They have 19 positions, including vacant positions, noting issues with attracting and retaining employees similar to a lot of other departments, but their compensation, their budget is actually below where the sheriff's office is today, and they've lost people to the sheriff's office. And if the sheriff's salary initiative is approved, this $90,000 request actually increases to a little more than $500,000 in order to maintain parity between the two departments. There's also ongoing legislative discussion that is intended to address funding for probation. There's been issues with many counties exceeding the max caseload per officer. It's 65 cases per officer, and the Arizona Supreme Court issued an administrative order late last year for counties that were exceeding that ratio. Mojave County was not exceeding the ratio. I believe we were pretty close to it, but within range, but about half of the counties around the state were in excess of that ratio. And so that order spelled out means to mitigate that and come back within line. The clerk of the court is requesting a career progression series, and as you're all aware, this is an ongoing push to put into place career progression series so that employees have really a roadmap in front of them from the date that they're hired to how they can have a full career with the county, move up in not just responsibility, but also in compensation. And so this would impact about 11 positions. There's 5 court services assistants that would be promotable next year to court services assistant senior, and there are 6 seniors that would be promotable to the court services assistant senior 2. And this has a general fund impact of about $42,000, with the remainder going to non-general funds. For the limited courts, we have personnel initiatives, about $83,000, and then a request for increase in travel to deal with weekend duty court coverage, as well as new judge orientation training that is only held in person in Phoenix, and so there's a need for that. The personnel initiatives include increases for the Justice of the Peace. The first 10% increase went into effect this past January. Another 10% increase is coming in January of 2024. And then Lake Havasu Court has several different personnel initiatives, converting a special detail assignment to a permanent market adjustment. That employee has taken on the duties of managing a civil case desk due to a recent vacancy, and they see an opportunity to consolidate there and have one person handle the additional duties. There's also a reclassification for a court service assistant to a assistant senior, and then they are requesting to add a new court service assistant in the criminal compliance division. They've had a 20% increase in the case filing load there since they deconsolidated back in 2019. For the public defender, more reclassifications, moving an office supervisor to an office manager. This would be funded partly through unfunding the investigator position that was recently vacated. The incumbent in this position that they want to move to office manager is in the process of obtaining and will graduate in 2023 with a management degree. They've also completed the AGTS Supervisors Academy, and through that unfunding of the investigator position, this actually provides a net savings to the general fund of $5,500. And then they're also requesting a career progression series that would include 4 of their office assistant senior positions. The legal defender has a similar initiative. They also have a vacant investigator position, and they are looking to reclassify their office supervisor to an office manager. Again, the incumbent has recently completed a paralegal degree, and so they feel this is justified. It also provides net general fund savings. Our recorder has one small request for a purchase of a scanner, but this is needed in order to make all of the workstations that they have in their office able to follow similar processes, be efficient, up-to-date technology, and it will enable them to immediately scan documents and return them to customers as they provide service. I'm requesting $25,000 for purchase of specialty software. We have 2 recent accounting pronouncements, one of which was included in our FY22 financials that was related to leases. The next one is related to subscription-based IT agreements. Both of these accounting standards require some fairly technical journal entries to be done every time a new contract is entered into or when a contract is adjusted. Just as comparison, implementation of the lease standard took one of my senior accountants working exclusively on that about 6 months last year. And so the GASB 96 pronouncement is actually more labor intensive than that. And so this software will drastically reduce the amount of time that it takes to stay compliant with both of those. Elections has several personnel initiatives. a market adjustment for the elections director, and then reclassifying the deputy director from range 20 to 22. They also have capital requests of almost $600,000 sourced to HAVA grant funding and the voting equipment replacement fund. The larger of the two is to upgrade or replace the e-poll book system, but there's also a $150,000 request for an additional scanner. They have had the past election, when they were counting ballots, they had one of the two scanners go down and malfunction. Luckily, it didn't cause any delays in the counting process, significant delays, but they would like to purchase a third scanner just to have that redundancy in order to prevent any delays in future elections. Human Resources has two personnel initiatives. They're requesting a new HR analyst position, and they are also requesting to reclassify an office assistant to a specialist. That would not happen until January 2024 at the earliest, and both of these initiatives are split funded between EBT and the general fund, and it's about a $50,000 increase, $45,000 increase to each one of those funds. The analyst is intended to really provide a lot of internal training around the county, things like FMLA, Supervisor Academy, conducting performance evaluations, those sort of things. Our IT director has requested $25,000 to purchase new monitors, and this would be the first year of a 5-year plan to replace about 800 monitors countywide. Most of the monitors are 8 to 10 years old, and they're starting to see them fail at a higher rate. There's also a request for additional data center nodes, noting that these are critical components to the technology infrastructure. They provide data protection and replication for the county. There is also, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when I get to procurement, but there is a request to realign the existing procurement and IT resources. And so this would basically streamline some of the internal service processes. It would shift some revenues and expenses and 3 existing FTEs from IT over to procurement in a new internal services division. Procurement similarly is asking to shift some of their resources. It's 1 FTE from their department, along with some revenues and expenses. They're also asking for a reclassification of an office assistant senior, and they would like to underfill that position as an office specialist within the existing career advancement series. So as I mentioned, we would like to create an internal services division within procurement, so it would report to the procurement director. But it's no new positions being created. It's taking positions, existing positions from IT and from procurement, and moving them into an internal services division. This would be tasked with the mail services, cell phone management, and operating the switchboard for the county. And so this, along with the shift in the expenses and the revenues, it includes an operating transfer from the IT's fund equal to the service charges that are associated with those personnel that are moving over. And then in the FY25 budget, you'll see those service charges begin to be allocated out to the other departments around the county. And as I said, this is no new FTEs, it's just moving current positions over to the new internal service divisions. Part of that is also to reclassify the 2 IT technicians that are moving over to range 11 office specialists, and their operating budget is about $1 million in FY 2024, but again, that is just moving those budgeted resources from the existing departments. Public Health has $77,000 of grant-funded requests. One of those is to procure an annual or semi-annual service contract for the appliances and machinery in the senior center. There is purchase of 2 vehicles, one for each of the prescription drug overdose prevention and the tobacco programs. They've seen an increase in the need to travel from Bullhead and Lake Havasu up to Kingman to pick up motor pool vehicles, and so this would result in efficiencies and savings long term. Here we have another item that was brought to our attention after the preliminary budget books were published. Director Kingsley was notified by KRMC of upcoming rate increases for the one-year senior center contract here in Kingman. The history of this is that during the pandemic, KRMC offered to lower the rates for meal prep. These are the meals that are used for the Meals on Wheels program. And it really was done as a goodwill gesture on behalf of the hospital. They have new administration there now. They're taking a look at their expenses, same as we are. Inflation's affecting everything, but they see a need to return to the previous rates. So these would be a return to the rates that existed in 2020, and it will allow for continued sustainability of the program, but there is a $143,000 impact to the general fund. And similar to the other increases, that will be included in the tentative budget. It's not included in the preliminary budget. For risk and emergency management, they have similar initiatives on both sides of the house there, but they are both looking to restructure their departments. What it will do is to put into place on the risk side a risk manager. They will oversee the risk division. They will report to the risk and emergency management director. These are meant to be working manager type positions that cover all aspects of the duties of the office. They're included in there is reclassifications, as I said, moving the consultant to a risk manager, and then reclassifying the office assistant from range 6 to an office assistant 2 at range 7, and moving a senior that's at range 8 to a range 11 office specialist, and creating another career progression series. On the emergency management side, very similar, moving a coordinator from range 20 to a manager at range 22, creating a progression series for those emergency management technicians, and then promoting one of the current techs from range 13 to a senior at range 17. They are also asking to fund a new technician position at range 13. They have a minor state Homeland Security grant capital request. This is, well, it's broken out between capital and a new initiative, but $5,700 for purchase of a cell radio amplifier, and then the other $4,300 of that $10,000 is for the related components that fall below our capital threshold. This is something they note is really needed to improve the communications during emergency situations when they're operating in conjunction with neighboring agencies. Our economic development director is requesting a new office assistant position, $50,000 impact to the general fund, but needed for market research and recruitment efforts, as well as providing resources to local businesses that are experiencing economic difficulties. There is also a request to transfer 25% of the tax revenues that are attributable to new construction. It's roughly $250,000 estimated for FY24. Just to give you an example of what those, what that enterprise fund money is used for, there was a past partnership the director notes with the Arizona Commerce Authority, and this one partnership resulted in 125 jobs with above average wages and health benefits, 46 million in capital investments that included a 163,000 square foot facility, and nearly $600,000 in estimated additional tax revenue over the first 4 years, spread between the county, the school districts, fire districts, other special districts. And this request is meant to be recurring with the amount to be determined in future years based on that new construction tax revenue. Development services will start with the initiatives that kind of broadly cover positions that assist multiple divisions. There's a request to reclassify a budget analyst to a budget accreditation manager, and market adjustments for an admin supervisor from step 7 to step 9 within the current range. The incumbent there has over 20 years experience, valued employee. Both of these are budget neutral. They're offset with permit and landfill fee revenues. On the planning and zoning side, there's another reclassification, planning technician to a permit technician senior. And again, I request to include that in the existing career progression series. Capital requests for continued consulting services to complete the design and implementation of their electronic submittal system for permits, and then replacement of 3 scanners as well. In the building division, there's a request to move an office assistant senior at range 8 to an office specialist at range 11. It's budget neutral. The $8,000 increase in salary is offset with fee revenue. Flood control has roughly $6 million of capital requests. They're noted there on the screen, but I'll just say that the alert flood warning system, that includes new monitoring stations and a new camera up in the Colorado City area, and all of these projects are sourced to the existing departmental fund balance. For environmental quality and landfill, about $3.6 million in total at the Mojave Valley landfill. A couple of different projects there: septage drying beds, design of the next cell, construction of a drainage channel, and then a permanent power system, which will either be traditional power or possibly permanent solar. At Surbat, Mojave Valley, and Beaver Dam, about $100,000 budgeted for potential land purchase related to expansion. Those would be handled through BLM or the State Land Department. And again, all of these projects are sourced to the existing fund balance. Moving on to Public Works, we have capital requests totaling about $2.2 million. This includes replacement or purchase of a variety of equipment. The biggest piece of that is replacing 4 motor graders. That's about $1.4 million. And that is inclusive of $600,000 worth of trade-in credits. It's $150,000 for each of those motor graders when they trade them in. There's also a asphalt hot box and recycler. That's the picture on the screen there, and that is needed to help eliminate the use of bag patch and utilize more cold mix, but in a nutshell, it's meant to reduce costs long term. We also have 2 requests for fencing installation, one at the Meadview Roads Yard, and that would fully enclose that location, and then cattle fencing at the 21st Street pit in Dolan Springs. That would be pending BLM approval, but Director Latosky noted that fencing has to be in place before they can actually start operations within the pit there, which they do need to start. On the engineering side, we have a market adjustment for a vacant geospatial specialist position. They would like to budget for the market adjustment and then place that position within the existing surveyor position series. The hope there, it's been vacant for quite some time. The hope is that doing this will allow them to actually attract a qualified candidate, and placement within that progression would provide opportunity for that candidate to become a registered surveyor and move up within the series. There's also requests for several replacement vehicles, one of them being a replacement vehicle for the Public Works Director, and then a request to purchase a drone, noting that this drone could also be shared and used from time to time with development services to help them with some of their projects. And then a minor request for soil stabilization that's part of the 5-year capital improvement road projects. The Traffic Control Division has requests to fund and fill a vacant engineering tech senior position. They're going to do this by unfunding a traffic control technician position. So no increase in funded FTEs within the department. They'd still have 15 filled FTEs, it's the same as this year, but net $9,000 increase to HERF. And that position would be tasked with monthly inspections, maintenance, and repair of a wide variety of internal telecommunications and electronics components. There's also capital requests to replace 2 trucks and to purchase a portable message board that has a trailer with it. On the equipment maintenance side, we have minor purchase of a jump box for heavy equipment, and then $72,000 in capital requests. There on the screen, you have a tilt deck trailer that is needed to retrieve vehicles when they break down. There's also a request to purchase a utility truck service bed that would be installed on an existing equipment vehicle, and then replacement of 8 leaking bank lube reels within the shop there. Fleet Services is requesting to replace a couple of the AC recharge machines that they have, as well as adding a FTE automotive mechanic position and create a progression series for the automotive mechanics. They did note that they will be requesting a second mechanic position next fiscal year. These mechanics would enable the department to provide for in-house rigging of vehicles, including the sheriff's vehicles, at a significant cost savings. And there is also a request to create a new fund for electric vehicle infrastructure. They would deposit an estimated $80,000 in there during fiscal '24, and that would be used to purchase things like charging stations and maintenance equipment for electric vehicles. The Public Works Director is wanting to transition to more electric vehicles in order to cut operating costs. There is also a pretty big change to fixed rate fees for assigned vehicles. This is needed to achieve and maintain stability within the fund and to avoid any future requests for contingency transfers. So to quickly move through it, it's an increase for the assigned daily rate from $150 a month to $275 a month. Long-term assigned vehicles would actually decrease from $400 a month to $275 a month. The daily rental fee goes up from $22 to $40 a day. Long-term mileage increases, depending on the type of vehicle, would be between 3 and 6 cents per mile increase. And they estimate that this will generate approximately $400,000 in additional revenue next year. There's also part of this is to reduce the carpool, the daily rental fleet, by about 2/3 over a number of years. That carpool revenue has really been lagging behind expenses, and when they did the analysis, a lot of those vehicles are being underutilized, and so it's a really good proposal to bring down the costs by only having as many vehicles as they can really utilize at a higher capacity. Vehicle use, budgeted $1.6 million for 20 replacement vehicles, and there is also a $800,000 request for a mobile command post unit for the sheriff's office. And an example of what that might look like is pictured. Similar to fleet, They're requesting adjustments to vehicle use rates, and then these are the rates basically for assigned daily carpool and long-term carpool vehicles, but the vehicle use rate is a monthly charge paid by the end user department, so this gets charged out to the departments, but it's to recover the cost of replacing the vehicle when it's at the end of its useful life, and also the cost of rigging for those vehicles when they need it. These rates were last updated in 2017. Adjustments, just the same as fleet, are needed to maintain the stability of the fund, and these fees are intended to be going forward examined annually and adjusted as needed rather than waiting several years. And so these adjustments for non-law enforcement vehicles would increase the monthly rate from $355 to $700, and for law enforcement vehicles it would go from $820 to $1,200 a month, and the additional revenue in FY24 is estimated at approximately $1 million. For facilities, we have $1.8 million in projects related to the 5-year plan. The largest portion of that for fiscal 24 is about $700,000 in HVAC replacements. And then there is $819,000 in jail major maintenance, a number of different projects listed there on the screen, but equipment, again, HVAC and water systems, and then upgrades to security and access control. Here we have another item that we received after the preliminary budget was issued. The city of Kingman, you're probably all aware, they are going to be discussing potential rate increases for their water system. That is scheduled to be discussed by City Council on June 6th, which is the day after we are set to adopt a tentative budget. So we will be including this in the tentative budget. I don't have a crystal ball to tell you whether or not it will pass by City Council, but it's about a $30,000 impact to the county annually. For our water districts, we have a requested merit increase for the engineering manager. This employee has been on special assignment since November of 21 due to inability to find a candidate to fill the position, and was left behind, quote unquote, regarding the annual performance evaluation pay increases. And so there's a request there to provide a merit increase. And then there's also capital requests for all 3 districts related to upgrades or continued expansion of the monitoring system. That totals about $50,000. There's also other capital requests that we will discuss. For I-40 and GVID, I-40 is requesting about $600,000, replacing a utility truck, purchasing an emergency generator, replacement of valves, electrical cabinet upgrades, and then converting well 10 to a variable frequency drive, which I'm told by Mr. Latosky wears better, operates more efficiently. We also have a request from GVID for $14,000 to purchase a trash pump that's mounted on a trailer. Moving on to our parks. In Wallapai Mountain Park, we have the first year of a 4-year phased upgrade to the campsite infrastructure. Phase 1 of this would, this is a budget neutral. It's all based on annual permit revenue, but upgrades to benches and fire pits, that sort of thing within the campsites. There is capital requests for replacement of a custodial vehicle that is used to keep the park clean, and then $50,000 in grant match related to the phase 1 construction of the Sawmill RV Park. The department does note that once that facility is completed, it could generate anywhere from $150,000 to $200,000 a year in additional revenue, which would bring the Wallapai Mountain Park much closer to financial self-sufficiency. And then there's also a request to replace a steel water tank liner. Down at Davis Camp, we have capital improvements of about $84,000, purchasing a new tractor, more improvements and upgrades to the monitoring system for the water, and then replacing a HVAC unit on one of the rental homes. Our animal shelter is requesting to reclass the shelter manager from range 18 to range 20, and then reclassing the 12 part-time animal care technicians there to 6 full-time positions. One of the challenges that the shelter has faced over the last year or so is that the applicants they get for part-time positions tend to be looking for something that's full-time, and so they don't stay very long. They get hired in and then they find a full-time job and they leave, and so there's a constant turnover, which is inefficient and doesn't really provide the best level of care to the animals as well as service to the customers. And so there's an expected actual net general fund savings of about $9,000, and the rest would be that savings comes out of two things: their recently updated fee schedule, as well as the increase in expected increase in activity when the new facility opens next spring. There's also about $20,000 in capital requests to purchase storage containers for use at the new facility. Within the county's library district, we have about $85,000 of new initiatives, including a career progression series, and then capital requests of about $200,000 for the items that are listed there on the screen. Well, we made it through all the new initiatives. Moving on to the general fund balance. And so these are recommendations from finance and from the county manager. We're recommending maintaining about a $35 million balance in the general fund at fiscal year end. And then we are also requesting an increase for the contingency balance from where it is today at about $9 million budgeted in FY23, moving that to $15 million. There's a number of considerations here. First, that target fund balance for the general fund, similar to past years, that approximates about 3 months of working capital, and that is needed in order for the county to continue paying its expenses between when the budget is passed and when tax revenues start flowing in the fall. Our recommendations here are founded in part on GFOA's best practices fund balance guidelines. I would just note that appropriate fund balance levels really consider several factors. You have cash flow needs, you have the values of the assets involved, you have risks associated with a number of things. Emergencies happen related to weather, accidents, liability, we have tax settlements, all sorts of things go into that recommendation for those balances. We've also, of course, taken into consideration inflation and its ongoing and widespread impact to county's operations. As I mentioned, these higher balances do allow the county to mitigate or move through known risks. They compensate for the increased level of uncertainty within our economy right now, allow us to respond to challenges. You heard from me earlier this year on CIP. We've had cost overruns on a number of projects. We're awaiting bids on a number of other projects. And so having that higher contingency balance will allow us to continue to move those projects forward if they should come in over budget. So we have a few assumptions that went into the budget calculations. The first is that we do expect actual spending to remain below budget. That is largely due to continued vacancies and salary savings. It's a good thing for the bottom line, but not so much of a good thing for the employees that are picking up the slack for all the vacant positions. So that's a big consideration. We also expect property values to remain stable over the next several years due to the increase in the limit to the increase in valuation each year as it approaches market value. There's still significant room there. So our property tax revenue should not see a significant decrease even if the overall economy has some issues. As I mentioned before, we do forecast a slowdown in state shared revenues. This is somewhat backed up by the projections that we've received from the state. They're projecting continued growth, but at a slower pace than we've seen over the last 2 years. And then we do expect inflation to be with us through at least the end of the calendar year 2024. One more item we did receive recently, and after the preliminary budget was established and published, recent projections from CSA and the Department of Revenue. These in total about $2 million increase over what we have budgeted. So they're projecting a $1 million increase to VLT, about a $675,000 increase over what we have budgeted for state shared sales tax, and about a $365,000 increase in PILT funding. But as always, these are estimates, they are not guarantees. We saw estimates a few months ago that were higher than what they just provided. So their projections are decreasing rather than increasing over the last several months. And we are erring on the side of caution and continuing to budget conservatively. So even though we received this information, there is no plan to up our projections in the tentative budget.
Luke, could you repeat those numbers, please?
Yes, for VLT, it's about a $1 million increase over what we have budgeted in the preliminary budget. For state shared sales tax, $675,000, and for PILT, $365,000. Thank you. Roughly $2 million in total. So our $4 million deficit that we're facing includes maintaining the property tax rate at the current rate of 1.7547. I just want to make you aware that is 57 cents below the maximum tax rate that the county is authorized to levy. That 57 cents represents almost $14 million a year in tax revenue. And the rate of 1.7547 is roughly 5 cents below what we have estimated for the TNT rate for next year. We don't have the final actual number yet, but it's probably pretty close to what we've estimated. So what we have is a structurally imbalanced budget. We have a funding deficit. I will just note that adjustments can be made to the budget that would allow us to meet the strict definition of a balanced budget in the current year for FY24, but they would not be fiscally sustainable beyond that. A truly structurally balanced budget is a budget where you have recurring revenues that will equal your recurring expenses, not just for a single year, but on an ongoing basis, taking into account growth, increases to costs, as well as increases to revenue. And so what we need in order to accomplish that is recurring streams of revenue that we can count on year after year after year. We've seen in the past several years an influx of one-time revenues from the federal government, from the state. As I mentioned earlier, we have $8 million in local assistance funding that is included in the FY24, so that's already in there. We still are $4 million short, but that money will not be available next year, and so that deficit will if everything else remains equal, that deficit will triple in FY25. And so we need long-term solutions. I do want to just say that it's not, certainly inflation has had a huge impact on the county, but we can't blame it all on inflation, because if we look back over the past 50 years or so, back to the 70s, the county has experienced pretty steady growth over that time frame. And so as a county grows, the costs do increase. We've seen really significant growth in the last couple of years with so many people moving out of California and Idaho. You have people that once came here as snowbirds, now they're permanent residents. You know, you have people that are dissatisfied with the political environment in California. They're recognizing that Arizona maybe lines up with their values a lot more. And so we're having, you know, our population is growing, our county is growing. And so that's a good thing. You know, we have businesses moving in here. That's a good thing. But that growth puts pressure on the county to provide services to those additional residents and services to those additional businesses, and drives up costs on our roads and just everything. And so I just want to recognize that it's not a problem that really has developed over just a few years. It's something that our county has been growing for many, many, many years. And so this is something that goes along with it. We need to be able to continue to plan for that long-term sustainable growth within the county. So I did promise to give you a couple of options. One of those would be to cover that $4 million deficit would be deferral of capital project. But again, this is a single year solution. Single year solutions are probably the least productive means of balancing the budget. We wouldn't have a truly structurally balanced budget. We'd still be facing issues next year. There's always an increase in the primary property tax levy rate that is less favorable than some options, more favorable than other options. But it could get us to where we need to be. Most productive options that I'd like to talk about are long-term and would develop new recurring streams of revenue. And so those would be authorizing the county excise tax. Our tax base for sales tax has grown significantly in the past several years. And so the projections that you have on the screen there, a half cent, which is the maximum that the county is authorized to implement, would generate somewhere between $22 and $26 million a year. A quarter cent, which is what we most recently had in place here in Mojave County, 11 to 13 million annually. Just to give you a basis of comparison, if we go back to FY19, the county's sales tax base, and these numbers come off of CSA's website. For FY19 was about 3.2 billion. The estimate for FY24 sales tax base is approaching 5.5 billion. So that's a pretty significant increase in a very short period of time. There's also the option, there's numerous special taxing districts that could be formed, but again, this is a much longer process, involves approval by the voters, so absolutely no guarantees there, but it could be a useful long-term planning tool to cover some of the costs of the county doing business. Just real quickly, I want to remind you of the remaining timeline as we move towards final budget adoption. So on June 5th, we will have our tentative budget adoption. July 17th, final budget hearing, hopefully adoption. And August 7th, the board adopting tax rates for the coming fiscal year. So to wrap up, we have a fiscal 24 budget of about $584 million. The general fund includes $123 million in operating expenses and $36 million in capital projects. Property tax and state shared revenues make up approximately 80% of the general fund revenues as proposed. Short-term solutions really are not viable past fiscal '24, and we need long-term solutions. Those will provide us with the best opportunity for financial stability and sustainability. I just want to recap really quickly the items that we discussed that came in after the budget, because we started with a $4 million deficit. We discussed fire district reimbursements on Monday again, so that's $205,000 that gets pulled out. It was included in the preliminary budget. The CSA increase of about $33,000, the increase in cost for the senior center due to KRMC's rates going back up was $143,000, and then the water rate increases here in Kingman, if they get passed on June 6th, would be another $30,000. So you add those all up, it's another $400,000 on top of the $4 million projected deficit. And that's all I have for you. So I'm happy to.
Great presentation, Luke. Questions for County Manager or our Financial Services Director? Supervisor Angus.
I just have one comment, and thank you. That was a really good presentation. The Sheriff's Office, the allocation for $800,000 for the mobile command center, as I understand it, that is going to be, it's in the budget, the state budget. When it's passed, they're pretty confident that's going to go through, and they're allotting $500,000 for that. And I have agreed to fund the rest of it out of my ARPA allocation. So I just wanted that to be out there, because it's a substantial amount, which was $800,000. Thank you.
Other comments?
Mr. Chair,
Supervisor Johnson.
is it staff's recommendation that they brought before us that we adopt a deficit budget? That's what you have brought us from staff?
Chairman Lingenfelter, Supervisor Johnson, no, it is not our intention that you would adopt a budget that is unbalanced. We would like to discuss options and get some direction from the board and how you would like to overcome that deficit.
I guess for simplicity, wouldn't it be better to bring us a budget with the revenues that we have now and balanced, and then say, if you want these other things, you need to find the money?
Mr. Chairman, board members, we wanted to have a discussion with you. We intend to utilize one of the capital projects by deferring it 1 year to bring you a balanced budget for FY24. So we have a path forward to present you with a balanced budget. We're prepared to do that today if that's what you wish to do, but given what we presented and what you heard, we did not want to be a myopic and narrow-minded and just bring that to you and forget about the overall picture that we wanted to discuss with you and in looking forward beyond just FY24. But we do have a path to a balanced budget. We can debate whether it will be structurally balanced or not for FY24 by deferring one project. And to be specific, we could defer the morgue or the medical examiner facility by 1 year to achieve a balanced budget in FY24.
I understand that. I just think it's a little confusing to the public if we say, oh yeah, we balanced the budget and next year we're so far upside down we can't get out. Some of the small things you were talking about, the animal control or animal shelter that we spent millions of dollars on or are spending millions of dollars, and now all of a sudden they need to come back in and buy storage sheds. That wasn't figured in when we budgeted all our money to begin with?
Supervisor Johnson, I'll attempt to answer that. There were some value engineering steps taken to bring that project not in line with budget but to bring it less out of line with budget, I guess would be the best way to say that. If you remember, there was a $2 million contingency transfer that was needed based on the bids that were received. And so I believe that the need for the storage containers is related to those value engineering steps. I'm not 100% sure of that.
I believe you're probably correct, but it's, you know, all you're doing is trying to fool us, not you, but the animal shelter people. Another small thing, but I don't know why the courts are having our JPs travel all the way to Phoenix, because that's the only way they hold classes. I mean, we're in the we have internet now and Zoom meetings, you know, it's a small thing, but it just seems kind of crazy that the courts who issue us executive orders to fund everything they want can't, you know, meet us a little ways. The legal and public defenders are giving up investigators. Has crime gone down where we don't need investigators anymore? Are they going to come back and ask for more investigators later?
Johnson, I would have to defer to the courts on that matter. I can tell you, though, that the first point that you mentioned, the travel to Phoenix for the new judge orientation, we did discuss that in our budget meeting with the department, and it did seem odd to me that in this day and age they don't offer a virtual option, but that is the case. We did explore that, and it's simply not an option that's provided at this time.
Yeah, that's all, Mr. Chair. I have other things, but the deficit is the part that bothers me. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Bishop?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's areas in this budget that can be trimmed, but I just wanted to remind everybody in regards to the Sheriff's Office that the County Supervisors Association is currently doing a study for Public Works recruitment and retention. They have a financial advisory committee, and they plan to have their report for all the counties, I think in October of this year. So maybe that'll shed some light on some of the problems the Sheriff's Office is seeing with not only the Sheriff's Office, but also the jail. So, but I think one of the answers that we could consider on this budget is putting off the morgue, the building of the new mortuary, and then maybe the sheriff's substations could be put off another year, unless we could consider maybe a dual property tax reduction with an increase in sales tax. But Supervisor Gold, as far as I know, is still opposed to sales tax. So I think our saving grace would be the capital improvement projects being put off. That's all I have.
I'd say, again, great presentation. It's not great that we have a deficit to solve. Appreciate that you're approaching this, you and your staff are approaching this very conservatively. I mean, out of everybody that we have at the county, our finance director needs to be the most conservative that we have. I'm thankful that you're upping the contingency. I think that looking at the financial environment out there, it's wise to bump that up from 9 million. That's a good idea. First and foremost, you look at all of the information that we've gone through, and conducting the business of the county simply has to come first before we look at funding and progressing the capital improvement plan. We have to progress or conduct the county's business. That's first order of business. So a couple of questions I have. There were a number of vehicle purchases and vehicle replacements and things like this. Is there a minimum number of annual miles that you have to exceed in order to qualify for a dedicated department vehicle rather than use a motor pool vehicle? And is that being uniformly applied? Obviously, if we can minimize the number of vehicles that we need and make sure that all of the department-specific vehicles are being used a minimum number of miles every year, that seems like it would be fiscally responsible to do that.
Chairman Lingenfelter, great question. I do believe, just from the discussions we've had with the departments, that certainly there are standards in place, and I'm sure that our Public Works Director could speak to that more eloquently than I can. But in discussing with the departments, these requests were, I can't say with certainty 100%, but the vast majority of them were for vehicles that are over the recommended useful mileage or age.
Director Lutowski, would you come up and add to that, please?
Good morning, Chairman Lingenfelter, members of the board. The county adopts and keeps to its vehicle management plan, which sets forth for law enforcement vehicles being a replacement of 5 years and 100,000 miles. So that to exceed both thresholds. Assigned non-law enforcement vehicles follow 6 years and 120,000 miles, and we are very diligent in ensuring that those two parameters are met. The only exception is when vehicles reach twice their minimum age for replacement, being that if it's 12 years or more for an assigned vehicle rather than 6 years, then we use that criteria for replacement, just because a 12-year-old vehicle, even if it doesn't have the 120,000 miles, generally incurs a substantial increase in regular maintenance to really warrant replacement. But I do want to point out, as well as another staff proposal with regard to our daily carpool rentals. Some of our daily carpools just are not being rented and being mileaged out. We have upwards of, I believe, about 20 daily carpool rentals, and what we'd like to do is see systematically about, with non-law enforcement users, taking a daily carpool rental and substituting it for an FY24 requested vehicle replacement, trying to get into their hands low mileage, rather recent year daily carpool rental. So that'll take some additional expenses off the 603 books, which is general funded, as well as then actually save the 604 from having to even buy a vehicle. I'm not professing we're going to be able to do that with a large amount of vehicles, but I think we can probably take a handful of vehicles out of daily carpool, and instead of buying a new vehicle, actually just assigning the daily carpool to a new user.
So are you saying that the daily carpool, that the vehicles that are available for use by everybody just by request, that's very low right now?
Actually, we have too high of an inventory.
Too high
we don't
of
need
an inventory, or it's not being used?
It's not being used, so they go hand in hand. So when I say too high of an inventory, we just have too many vehicles that are not being used, and we can scale back in our daily carpool.
And when the fleet policy is applied, the 6 years and the 160,000?
120.
120, excuse me.
Both thresholds need to be met.
For the non-law enforcement,
Yes.
When they're looking to replace a vehicle, do they have to show you that they're going to be driving a certain minimum number of vehicles per year in order to replace that vehicle before they replace that? Or if they're driving below that, perhaps they could just use the fleet vehicles?
Actually, Chairman Lingenfelter, that's a great question. We actually do what's called a utilization study every year. So we do flag vehicles that are being driven not at the average rate of mileage. And what we do is we notify the department directors and consult with them whether or not it is in their interest to still keep operating that vehicle. We do leave that decision to the department heads, though.
All right, thank you. Luke, I have one other question for yourself and for Sam. There were also many requests for reclassifications and things like that, above and beyond what you're doing countywide with adding 3 steps to the ranges and things like that. Has administration vetted all of those, and are you recommending that all of those be included in what's funded?
Mr. Chairman, board members, yes, we really have. As we met with every department individually and went through position by position as to the basis for the requests, what are they doing today, and how is this reclassification serving the need of the department? In a lot of places, because of the vacancies and the need to multitask and distribute the tasks, people are picking up other tasks within their department that encroaches on operating out of class. It really does make sense. As we explored those options as well, we looked at what consolidation is taking place, how the needs of the department is evolving. When we agreed to it as a part of a holistic approach, as part of a career advancement series that provides employees a path forward. So I can sincerely tell you, yes, this is our recommendation, and it was not rushed through. We did discuss every request with every department. Mind you, we asked questions to ensure that the minimum threshold that we wanted to see met is being met, but we understood that that was at the discretion of the department head being appointed or elected. We worked with them, but those were indeed vetted requests, and I solidly and strongly recommend them to the board.
Thank you, Manager Elters. Looking at the options that you listed out, I know the first year that I was on this board, there was a push for a countywide excise tax, and we didn't have the votes for that on our board. Myself, I think that finding a way to somehow diversify our revenues, we have to do that. I mean, obviously, economic development's out there doing what they can. I mean, one of the things that is in our circle of control in some way is to broaden the base, and so as many new businesses as we can get to expand. I'm not so much looking at attraction, because attraction is much more expensive, but everything that economic development can do to work with our partners to expand our current businesses, that's a good thing for Mojave County. But looking at the other stuff, definitely, I'm not sure if a general county excise tax would really fly. I know we have to have a unanimous vote. I would look at something like that if it were narrowly tailored and dedicated to something specific, and that there would be a circuit breaker option, that if anybody tried to say, no, we're actually going to go fund this now, that it would automatically circuit breaker and be killed. And then I think it'd be also a good idea to have something that would have a sunset provision as well. I'm not sure if that would have any success. The other thing that we can look at is, you mentioned special district formation, and I know in Mojave County that all of us feel very strongly in supporting our law enforcement here. We support our police and the jail and all of that goes in that. One of the special districts that we can look at is a jail district. Have you looked at any sort of information regarding a jail district? I know that most Arizona counties have a jail district already. I think all of our neighbors do, certainly. Coconino, Yavapai, I mean, everybody's surrounding us. That's not something that the county supervisors implement. We direct an election, and then the voters of Mojave County actually say whether or not they want to support law enforcement or not. And I know that could be a sales tax driven thing. It's not going to do anything for us immediately, but when we talk about long-term solutions, it's definitely something that could be a pretty powerful part of a long-term solution, funding and supporting our law enforcement here in Mojave County. Do you have any thoughts on on that?
Chairman Lingenfelter, yes, we have looked into jail district formation. You're absolutely correct. It's a great long-term tool. It would certainly help with growth over the next several years. There are more counties in Arizona that have jail districts than not, I believe. There is one factor that really comes into play from what we've learned and speaking with other counties and speaking with CSA regarding a jail district. The jail district, you know, whether it's based on excise taxes or property taxes, the same conditions apply, and the term is maintenance of effort, because the way the statutes that govern jail districts are put together, whatever the county is paying the year that district is approved by the voters, you know, and in our case, we're approaching $20 million a year for the jail. Whatever the county is paying at that point of time, they are required to continue to pay. And so a jail district excise tax would certainly generate revenue, and that revenue could be used for ongoing increases in the cost of operations. It could be used to be put away into a fund to cover the cost of future expansion, of future replacement of the jail, all those sort of things, programs that operate within the jail. If there's, you know, we look at Coconino County in particular, they have a number of very successful programs that they've implemented within their jail that fall under the jail district to reduce recidivism and combat other issues.
Well, if I understand it right, I mean, yeah, there's that maintenance of effort requirement, and so you can't go backwards. You can't not fund out of the general fund what you're funding right now, but in the future, because that fund has always escalated and grown, you can draw a line and say, here's what the maintenance effort was, and then from that point forward in the future, I mean, I think that you're able to fund some of the salary stuff, vehicles, equipment, so it doesn't help us immediately, but I mean, if you're going to try to pivot into more long-term solutions, you know, I think it's something that is worth looking at. And what are we missing out on right now? I know that in Mojave County, in my district right now, or in I think in Supervisor Bishop's district, we've got the West Kingman transportation interchange, we've got the Rancho Santa Fe, we've got the Kingman Crossing, about $200 million in construction that's going to be going forward in the next 2 years, 3 years. I think that the sales tax that the county would get off of that, if you ask CSA, is between $500,000 and $600,000, just those projects, one-time funds. In addition, you have just droves and droves and droves of Californians and all sorts of other people that come and they recreate on our lakes and our rivers, and they're recreating for free right now on the backs of our taxpayers. Because what do they use? If they get in trouble, they use our law enforcement, they use our jail if they get into trouble. I mean, they're recreating for free right now on the backs of our taxpayers, and I don't think that that's right. So that's all I have to say.
Chairman, I absolutely agree with you. I point out the maintenance of effort primarily just to make sure that everybody understands that a jail district wouldn't be a short-term solution. It's a great long-term planning tool. It allows for continued growth. It's an absolutely great option. There's a reason why so many counties around the state use it.
Immediately, I think that we have to look at maybe making cuts to the capital improvement program, because, you know, county business has to come first. So anybody else have?
Mr. Chairman. Supervisor
Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess great is in the eye of the beholder on taxation. If we're going to go to Connex storage containers, I think there's quite a few of them on the border where the governor built a double stack Connex wall and the new governor is tearing that down. So we might be able to get a good deal on a Connex container. You don't think that a 67% increase in the contingency fund in 1 year is excessive?
Supervisor Gould, considering where some of the engineers' estimates for capital improvement projects have come in and where we have seen some bids come in at, we do not think that that is excessive.
But those are capital improvement projects and not operational issues.
That is correct. Those were
I
the-
suggested that you guys build a truth in taxation level budget because I might be able to choke that down. But that is not what I see before me here today. I see a budget that won't, you can't even maintain the rate that we charged on property last year without, and make TNT. As far as the sales tax, there's a Huey Long quote that is, "Don't tax me, don't tax that guy behind the tree." People continue to tell me that sales tax is paid by visitors. I still have not seen a solid report that says that. All that's going to happen if you go to a sales tax is you're going to end up with more taxation, because that's what happened in Lake Havasu when they played this game. They had a property tax. They said, let's go to a sales tax. We'll reduce the property tax. So then they instituted the sales tax, reduced the property tax, and the property tax climbed right back up, and the people ended up paying more taxes. You cannot link a sales tax to a reduction in property tax because you just can't do it in statute. That's just how it works. If you can figure out a way to do that, then I might be willing to put a sales tax in exchange for a reduction in property taxes. But since that can't be done, I'm not really interested in taxing my folks more. But I would much rather have seen a truth in taxation level budget. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chair,
Supervisor Johnson.
I have another question for the director. Where is that additional millions coming for the contingency from?
I think his question was, where are the additional millions to boost the contingency fund coming from?
Chairman Lingenfelter, Supervisor Johnson, we would boost the contingency fund using a combination of, as you've seen in past years, we've had significant vacancy savings due to the number of vacancies around the county. And so we're projecting that we'll come in significantly under budget as far as salaries go by the end of this year compared to what was budgeted for FY23. That would be, I believe, the biggest portion of that. We've also had some revenue estimates, state shared sales tax. That was budgeted conservatively for FY23. Same approach we're taking for FY24. There has been growth around the state that exceeded our budgeted revenues, and so that would make up, I can't say for certain that makes up 100% of it, but those would be the biggest two sources.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
County Manager Elters.
related to the overall contingency, it is truly a substantial increase, as Supervisor Gould pointed out, but that is by design. Given the number of contracts that we brought before you, the board, with increases that were in the 30, 40, and 50%, and given the number of contingency transfers that we've done from various accounts to vehicle purchases, fuel for those vehicles, replacement parts, given the costs related, the actual bid of projects that have come in for buildings, replacement parts, or new buildings, as well as other projects, horizontal projects, roads, understanding that those are HERF funded, it made perfect sense for us to to take the most conservative approach, knowing that this board has in the past valued that and increased the contingency. So when these projects and contracts come up, we have the means to come to you to cover them and maintain a threshold or a level that would be a responsible level to stay at and not drop behind. So yes, it is, and it is really, it's an increase, fairly significant on both the contingency as well as the cash balance of $35 million, but that was by design because we wanted the board to have the utmost flexibility to meet the needs throughout the year as we continue to experience these cost increases. Thank you.
Manager Elters, I have one quick question related to the capital improvement projects. It sounds to me like if we're going to maintain this pay-as-you-go with capital improvements, the new capital improvement projects, that's where the cuts, or a percentage of the cuts, is going to have to come from in order to balance the budget this year. But I do want to ask, I know in prior years, the county's capital improvement project list was, it had a dedicated revenue source, that quarter-cent sales tax, that's went away. But at that point, the county actually financed buildings over a certain term, made payments over a certain term, and you paid in the first year's dollars, even if it was a 10 or 11-year term. My question to you is, does it have to be a sales tax, that dedicated revenue stream, or can the county create some sort of a fund in the financial services department, just a fund, and then go back to looking at financing facilities? I'm just asking the question. There's probably a reason why we're not doing it.
Mr. Chairman and board members, thanks for the dialogue and thanks for asking the question. My background is engineering, not financing, so I'll answer it from that angle, and I'll invite Luke to jump in if he wishes to do so. In engineering, in my transportation world that I've spent all my career in, we've done that multiple times, just as you noted here in Mojave County where these buildings were delivered. Truly, to achieve that, you have to have a reliable revenue stream that you can bond against. As you know, and I know you know that well, Mr. Chairman and board members, you can go out in the market, float bonds, receive the funding, build, deliver a project that is in need, and then pay it back with the reliable revenue stream that you bonded against. That's how we deliver this building and others in the county. Short of with the presentation presented to you today with the two revenue streams, which is the state share taxes and the property taxes, I would submit to you we lack that revenue stream today, Mr. Chairman, to dedicate it to paying back payments on projects. With sincere humbleness, I can tell you I've been involved in many projects, both on the delivery side and the planning and design side, where we use that very same method to get there, but you do have to have a revenue stream, and I do not know where that would come from today, Mr. Chairman, because as it is, and as you heard, and as it's evident by the numbers, our revenues and our expenses are very close, and this year our revenues falls under our expenses to the point where it takes a capital improvement project being deferred to provide a balanced budget. So we can, I and staff know how to do what you just described, which is securing revenues, securing capital against a reliable revenue stream and delivering projects. I will end with this and stop with it. As you all know, it costs a lot. The cost of construction continues to grow. So what we can deliver today for X, I guarantee you will not be delivered for the same X dollars in 2 or 3 or 5 years from now. So the longer you delay a project, the more you pay for it. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Chairman Lingenfelter, I would just add, I absolutely concur with Manager Elchers. We have to have a dedicated funding source. That's going to be the main criteria to get anyone to underwrite a bond, would be having a dedicated revenue source, because they want guarantees that you can make those principal and interest payments as they come due. But interest also is a big consideration, because if we extend that, if we don't do pay-as-you-go and we go out to bond, there's a significant interest expense that's added on to the cost of the project. And so that is another consideration. Mojave County has used the pay-as-you-go approach over the years because of the benefit to the taxpayer. Because we're talking about millions and millions of dollars in interest on top of projects that already cost a significant amount of money.
Yeah, for the admin building and the jail, though, the county didn't have $100 million in the bank, and they still got it done. And we're sitting here, so.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe bonding takes a vote of the people. The reason they did not bond the jail, or I believe this building, and did a lease finance agreement was because they didn't want to go to the voters and ask the voters what they thought. Thank you.
Supervisor Bishop.
Thank you. I was just curious, with the concept that we had in the past for a regional sheriff's substation rather than 2 additional substations. I don't recall what that discussion was or why we changed from a regional sheriff's office substation in the southern part of the county to 2 new substations. Can you refresh my memory on that, Sam?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Bishop, that point has come up in various meetings when the sheriff presented to the board. I believe as of today, we continue to proceed at least with the directive from the board that there are 3 substations and $5 million set aside for capital to improve those and deliver them. I am definitely aware of the discussion and the questions related to regional versus staying the course. But truthfully, we have not received direction from the board to deviate from the current plan, which is the 3 sites, Lake Havasu, Mojave Valley, and the Strip area. So I recognize what you're saying, but I don't believe that debate was settled and the board gave us any different direction.
Supervisor Angus.
Again, in the state budget this year, it's in there right now. If it gets signed, it's not over till it's over, but there is a $10 million allocation for Mojave County Sheriff's substations in the budget. So that would really take that off the table as an expense.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and board members and Supervisor Angus, you're absolutely right. In fact, just for the record, we are working very closely with the sheriff and his senior leadership team on that. And we've been at the planning and design for the Lake Havasu site, which was supposed to go first for some time now. We've gotten to a point where we have an agreement on a footprint as to what the building would look like. We've paused deliberately to wait for the legislative session to end, to recognize what is in it for the sheriff's buildings before we proceed. I will tell you, it is my understanding and staff's, the engineer's recommendation, our staff, that the $5 million will not deliver those projects as envisioned by the sheriff and the board in the past. It will take as much of that $10 million that Supervisor Angus mentioned to get us there. So we are literally in holding pattern now without incurring any cost to the designers or the county as a result of that wait, of that pause to wait for the legislative session to end. So thank you for pointing that out.
Mr. Chair,
Supervisor Johnson.
I think we're being a little short-sighted there, complimenting the state on giving us money for sheriff substations, which is nice in their approach. But as we all know, the costs are always the ongoing maintenance and operation of these offices. And if you're going to have, we can consolidate like everybody else in the world has done with regional policing. You only have one building to take care of and one set of brass to manage that office, where you're going to go with two and you're going to have same thing, but twice the expenses. That's all. Thank you.
Something to look at. All right, I guess we'll move to the section of our agenda for the elected officials. Are there any elected officials in attendance that would wish to address the board? County Attorney Smith, I see you. Welcome.
Good morning. Chairman Lingenfelter, members of the board, Mr. County Manager, Mr. Finance Director, and staff, and of course, Madam Clerk of the board. I'm here to talk to you today about the subject of balancing our budget. Our particular department, County Attorney's Office, is only asking for one thing this year, and that is to supplement the funding that we have lost because of the reduction in the VOCA funds. And we're looking at between a 50 and 60% reduction there, and it affects 4.7 people. So we don't have any additional asks this year whatsoever. Obviously, we have an interest in the building project that's going on, which we did donate $1 million towards that out of our own funds to make that project happen in the future. But we don't have any asks, and I'm not asking for anything additional for my department. As far as what the board has done collectively over the last few years, I think it's been outstanding as far as putting our employees first. You are in a very difficult position. All 5 of you are elected by your constituents from Bullhead City, Lake Havasu City, Kingman, and the surrounding areas, and you represent those constituents, and the people in Mojave County do not ever want to see any of their taxes go up whatsoever. On the other hand, you 5 are also collectively, in my opinion, the CEO of the largest employer in Mojave County. You are responsible for providing the services to this county, which have been excellent over the years. In my opinion, I've been here for 35 years working for Mojave County. What you have done for the employees, particularly the compensation packages, which have been put forth through Luke Mornian and through Sam Elters, but adopted by the board in terms of the merit increases, is fantastic. I think it's going to help us retain employees going forward. I know it's something that Supervisor Johnson has talked about for years, is merit increases, and that is in effect right now, and it is our best tool for retention, in my opinion. Getting to the last point, having known our county manager over the last couple of plus years, our new finance director, These are gentlemen that I have tremendous respect for. They do not cry wolf. They are not the boys who cried wolf. I have never heard them before speak in these terms that we're in a crisis right now. They don't do it. They're very matter of fact. They're fiscally conservative, just like this board is. But I am absolutely convinced and believe that we are in a tough spot right now. And it is incumbent, I think, on the board to do something about it. I don't have the answers. I don't have the solutions. What I do know is that in Mojave County, unlike the federal government, we balance our budget. We always balance our budget. We always have. And I'm confident we'll do that going forward. I know that nobody wants to see taxes raised, but right now it looks like either the quarter-cent sales tax or the valuation on the property tax are probably the only ways to go to balance this budget. I heard what Supervisor Gould said regarding the quarter-cent sales tax, and that people always say, well, we're passing that on to the visitors. And obviously, he's right about that. There are inherent costs. Everybody here that pays sales tax, it is going to impact us. But that is something that going forward, at least when you know you're out there, you're buying products, you're comparison shopping and that, you have that decision as an individual consumer to decide what you're going to pay for products. So I just would urge the board to think about this. I know that everybody has their philosophical differences, not completely united on which way to go, but I just really hope you consider that our county manager and our county finance director, they're not people that mess around. They tell it exactly like it is, and I hope going forward that we're going to be able to balance our budget. And I thank you for your time. I thank you for what you've done for the employees, particularly over the last few years. It's been outstanding. It's really helped us to be able to aggressively recruit and also keep up with our sister counties, such as Maricopa County, the Attorney General's office. We're competitive with them right now. So, thank you.
Any questions for County Attorney Smith? Supervisor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, those 4 VOCA positions, were those positions created because of the availability of those grant funds?
Absolutely, yes. Chairman Lingenfelter, Supervisor Gould, absolutely. What has happened is that when the victims' rights legislation has been passed, and I think you've been part of some of those movements over the years when you were in the legislature, it has resulted in much better services for victims where they get notice of every hearing. They have victim advocates that help them and go to court with them, but it has also provided mandated services that we have to provide. So those are things going forward with that we absolutely have to do. There's absolutely nothing we can do about it. We have to provide notices to victims who invoke their rights. We have to give them the right to consult with our attorneys before we make plea offers. They have the right to be heard at change of plea on whether or not plea agreements are appropriate, and they have a right to be heard at sentencing. And so those are mandated services. And unfortunately, as your question suggests, for whatever reason, the VOCA funds are being cut somewhere between 50 and 60%, and has put those employees at jeopardy right now. Although we have met early on with our county finance director and our county manager, and I think it's something that we're going to be able to work out.
It seems strange to me, the good things that those programs do, that the state with a budget surplus is cutting that money. And it also seems strange, we create, a lot of times we'll create positions because of grant money, and then when that grant money goes away, then it becomes a general fund obligation. So that's also something that we need to keep in the back of our mind when we do create those positions that are funded, grant funded. But it seems strange that they're awash in cash apparently, but yet we're seeing a reduction in beneficial programs. But I just wanted to ask you that question. Thank you, sir.
Supervisor Bishop.
Good morning, Mr. Attorney. Has the ACJC indicated that they plan to offer a grant to extend this fund?
Chairman Lingenfelter, Supervisor Bishop, as of this time right now, we don't have any guaranteed revenue stream, including ACJC funding, to supplement what we're losing in the VOCA grant at this time.
Okay, thank you, and I will check into that for you.
Any other questions? Thank you for your time this morning,
you.
Attorney Smith. Thank you. Are there any other elected officials, or excuse me, I see at least a couple. Are there any other elected officials that would wish to come down to the podium and make comments? Seeing none, we'll move to the courts. Presiding Judge Moss, welcome.
Welcome, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the welcome, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and County Manager Sam Elters, as well as our Finance Director, who did a really great job in his presentation. I want to first express my appreciation and sympathies for the board. I was in your seat for about 5-6 years, and I understand the pressures you must be under. My view is that inflation, if you look at the official sources and the cumulative over the last couple of years, is 10 to 20% officially, somewhere in that range on both labor and goods. And you see that with the increasing wages that are being demanded to fill positions, both in the private and the public sector, as well as the cost of goods. I think that estimate is low if you look at the construction projects, which encapsulate both labor and goods, and they're significantly over that. So if you look at the official data, it's high. If you look at the practical reality when it comes onto our budgets, it's higher. But that's the reality that we are confronted with and that you are confronted with, and those numbers don't change. My view on the budget issues, and I've got a few issues I'd like to go through, is I believe Supervisor Johnson asked why the limited jurisdiction judges, our Justice of the Peace pro tems, aren't trained by Zoom. And that's because they go to Phoenix because they're there to learn how to be judges, and you can't learn how to manage and act in a courtroom by seeing it on a TV screen. You have to sit in that chair. You have to be in the jury box. You have to be part of a jury pool as jury selection goes on, and they have to actively participate in that process. It's not theoretical knowledge, which is being imparted to them, that you can get by reading a book or watching it on TV. It's practical knowledge, so they know how to run a courtroom. It's not something that is, I think the phrase I hear from the federal government a lot is shovel-ready jobs. You hand a guy a shovel and they go to work. They actually need to learn a lot about the interworkings of a courtroom. And so I understand why the Arizona Supreme Court requires our limited jurisdiction judges, the vast majority of them who are not trained lawyers, show up in person so they can learn how to run by touching it, by participating in it, and they don't have problems. It's a fairly modest expense. It's also an expense that only comes up every 2 or 3 years, every 4 years. So it's not something which is every single year in significant amounts. So I wanted to respond to why that happens. I'll also say that Mojave County is a leader when it comes to remote appearances. We have piloted the digital evidence portal in order to have our exhibits in courts put online so it's viewed on screens, big screens, so that the pieces of paper aren't taking up space and costing rent and all the other maintenance costs that are incurred. We were a pilot on that. It's now the rule, the law for all courts in the state of Arizona, and we were one of the first adopters, and it's being spread throughout the state. We've also piloted the remote civil jury trial project, where we have conducted multiple mock trials and 2 actual jury trials remotely, where jurors are appearing from home, attorneys are appearing from their offices, and the only witnesses are appearing from wherever they're at, and the only persons actually in the courtroom are the judge and court staff. Though we've done 2 of those, they were successes. There are problems, there are trials, but Mojave County was the first. in the state of Arizona to do that. We've noted some benefits, for example, on saving on jury fees. I think the last trial was $300 on jury costs as opposed to $1,300 or $2,500 in jury costs. There's also a reduced jury pool. Anecdotally, most of my juries, when they're out, deliberate from 15 minutes to 1 hour. This particular jury deliberated an entire day. My personal opinion is that if they weren't feeling rushed to get home at 5 p.m. and they're just going to enter a decision, come heck or other consequences, and when they can do that without being stressed, they take more time and they pay more attention to the case, and maybe more justice is being done. As a result of projects like that, Mojave County is essentially a hybrid court system now. Every single trial I do, we have witnesses appearing remotely. Our grand jury is hybrid, where persons who show up to grand jury service, they have a choice. They can show up in person, and you'd be amazed how many people will avoid the benefits of appearing remotely because they want to be in the courtroom. They want to actually experience it. But typically we have 3 to 5 of our grand jurors who appear from their place of business or home, and they do their grand jury service by Zoom. The world is moving in that direction, and Mojave County is the very front edge of the movement in that direction. We're a rural county, but we are a rural county who has, in my opinion, the best bench in the state. We're not afraid to take chances. We're not afraid to learn. Yes, sometimes that blows up in our face, but we also have a lot of successes that go along the line. I would like to talk about our budget. I think it was identified in your summary materials as $720,000. That's a lot of money. $500,000 of that, $500,000, is our juvenile detention center. And that's linked to the sheriff's office request. And that's because there's been a couple times over the last couple years where I, as presiding judge, have almost closed our juvenile detention center because we can't keep officers in there at mandated detention levels because we're dealing with vulnerable offenders, minors. Some of these minors are very dangerous minors. But regardless, they are minors, and the staffing requirements to police minors because of liability and other issues is higher. And you do not want a vulnerable 14 or 15 or 16-year-old person in a detention center with only one person watching them, who likely always or has other duties. The reason why you're in between a rock and a hard place between that is because right now I think we're staffing 20. 19 is when, in my mind, in past experiences, we are now pulling surveillance officers off the street to get back up to that minimum of 20, which stresses our detention officers, and which means our surveillance officers aren't watching convicted felons on the street, the guys that we're supposed to be keeping the public safe from, because we now have to do this cost-benefit analysis. Where are we pushing our resources to? I have toyed with the idea of closing that detention center once or twice, as I said previously, and the data I get from our probation department is that it would cost you guys more if we were to do that, because these young people would have to be transported. They would have to be taken to some other county, and based upon the dollar figures I saw, you'd be paying a premium on a per-day basis until they could be transferred to Adobe. And because these are not kids who are playing tardy from school. Several years ago, I had a case where a group of young people broke into cars and vehicles in Lake Havasu and stole firearms, and they were using drugs, and they had stated intentions to do bad things. Our law enforcement picked them up, which is very good, because otherwise we'd have tragedies. So juvenile detention is not used to the same numbers as the sheriff's detention is. It's necessary. It's going to happen one way or the other. And do you want to pay less here, even though it's more, or do you want to pay more by paying Phoenix to take our problems off our hands? And I really hate to say that, but that's what it comes down to. And that's part of what I face, the rock and the hard place I face when I look at these problems, and which becomes a rock and a hard place between your problems. Where do we get $500,000 tied to our sheriff's department, of course, their detention problems? How do we get that? Where does that come from? When it comes to our other actions, the other $220,000 asked by the courts, those are general fund charges, but I want to tie into, as Supervisor Gould correctly pointed out, they're general fund charges, but frequently we can find grant monies to sort those out, and for a short period of time. And we have. For example, I believe on Monday, you approved, I think it was 100,000 plus, somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 in ARPA money for an already existing general fund position, which is going to fund it, I think, for 3 years. Was that, Kip? That we're now, so it's part of the 2-year, part of your 220 plus, but we've taken $69,000. So general fund, we're putting money back in that way. When it comes to our position that we're asking for our position reclassification. Well, that's replacing an employee who just retired, who was paid more, and it's actually saving $19,000 a year for general fund monies. We have done that over and over and over again. So yes, there's a cost of $220,000 to the general fund. A significant portion of that is coming back from grant funds, from one-time sweeps. So to go to Supervisor Gould's point, it is a $220,000 charge to the county budget. And some of those charges for either 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years are going to be compensated in part. So it's not like the court is saying, here's $220,000, pay us. We're trying to be partners. We're trying to work. We're trying to minimize the costs and expenses with you, and we have been working with county administration on that. There's another personnel issue within the courts where Lake Havasu City, I'm going by memory now, has a 60% increase in criminal filings and a 60% increase in criminal and civil filings both. And based upon they're funded or they're staffed right now at 2019 levels when the separation occurred. And they chose a conservative estimate in 2019. But now those case filings are spiking. And they came in, and the county administrator, and we asked, and Luke, we asked, can we get 2 positions for Lake Havasu City? They did not roll over. I think someone asked, are we just going along to get along from the county manager? And that was not the case. I felt I was in like in a World Wrestling Federation ring and being tossed around, and they twisted our arm, and so we're asking for 1. It doesn't change the data points. It doesn't change the fact that we have a 60% increase in filings in the Lake Havasu City Justice Court in both civil and criminal cases. But Justice of the Peace Davis has agreed to try to make do with 1 this year. And if it doesn't work, we'll knock on your door next year. The courts are not asked there trying to be unreasonable, trying to be arrogant, trying to make demands. We are trying to work with you. We're trying to cooperate. And I think we largely have succeeded in doing that by minimizing a lot of these expenses. Yes, we could just close the jail, but it's not going to help you when it comes to saving money. It's not. The juvenile detention center, I should say. I'll let the sheriff speak to the jail. But it's not going to help you over the long term when it comes to saving money. In fact, it's going to cost you money. Now, when it comes to recommendations, I think the staff gave a very good bullet point of what your options are. I think I remember 5. You can put a Band-Aid over it. You can mask it. You can cover it up for 1 year by canceling capital improvement projects, but that debt still exists, that deficit still exists, and you're gonna have twice the problem that you have next year that you have this year if you do that. I think that's short-sighted because these infrastructure projects, the need for them is not gonna go away. I'll give an example when it comes to our Superior Courthouse, the historic courthouse, which is one of those many capital improvement projects. It deteriorates every day it sits there. And we're gonna have a historic courthouse, which if you go inside and you look at the windows that get broken and the weather that gets inside and the animals such as pigeons that get in there, which is slowly deteriorating into a hulking wreck. And if you wait a year, if you wait 5 years, if you wait 10 years, you're gonna have a ruin. You're gonna have an archaeological site. You're not gonna have a historical courthouse, which is going to be capable of being used. And you're ignoring the fact that when it comes to the existing Kingman Justice of the Peace, their building is a trailer that was supposed to last a handful of years, and the courts have made last 20-plus years. And it's not up to, when it comes to the infrastructure that it needs, when it comes to remote appearances, case line, Zoom, all the rest of it, it can't accommodate that. There's interruptions in services constantly in that courthouse, and their judicial productivity credits are rising. More and more customers are trying to crowd their way into that trailer, and it's not conducive for long-term working conditions. It's not. I also think that there's other county departments that want to get in there for other reasons, but that's something else. So when it comes to the courts and their capital improvement projects, are you conservative? Do you bite the bullet? Do you pay for it now? Or do you stick it on some other board a year from now, 2 years, 5 years from now, who's going to pay much more to get it done? In Washington, D.C., they would take the easy way out. They would say, we are going to use our gimmicks. We're going to sweep money, one-time money here. We're going to get into the highway transportation funds. We're going to get into the Social Security Administration funds. We're going to pay our operating expenses, and we're going to pretend we balanced our budget. I guess you could do that. Look how that works out for Washington, D.C. Not very well. Look how it worked out for the taxpayers, the American taxpayers. Not very well. I think it's better to come to grips with the reality that's confronting you and solve the problem going forward. When it comes to property taxes, my recollection is, it's been a long time since I worried about the ins and outs of property taxes, but if you pass it now, you'll have monies available to you a year or two down the road, which is exactly the time period that you're looking at these double expenses. If you wait a year, you're waiting for monies a year or two down the road, which means you've passed a property tax, but you haven't covered your $12, $13, $14 million shortfall next year. So what do? When it comes to sales tax, I believe that is from my perspective as a court member and as a former board member and even as a citizen, that's good, if only because you've diversified your revenue sources, and everyone who's run a trust, everyone who's run a business wants to have diversified revenue sources. Supervisor Gould is correct. There is no law that prevents a board that has decreased property taxes in light of sales tax from undoing that. Well, then the voters will hopefully hold the board who broke that promise accountable. That's the recourse that you have. When it comes to the out-of-towners, I can tell you when it comes to court filings, when it comes to cases that we have to deal with, there are significant numbers, not just California, though that is a massive, I think that's the state you referenced, Chairman Lingenfelter. There is a lot of Californians that come through our court system, and I believe our jail system. But there's other states. Canadians like us. Washington State likes us. There's a lot of other states that come to visit us. And to some degree, it is a fair statement that they are free riders in our current system. So my view is, and I say this when it comes to having an honest discussion about what needs to be done. My view is, my suggestion is, and it's just my idea, and it's not an idea that is due any more weight than anyone else's idea, is you're really stuck with trying, and I hope, a sales tax of some sort that probably won't pass. And then you're stuck with property taxes unless you choose to cover up the problem, throw a blanket over it, pretend it doesn't exist, and then have it blow up on you a year or 2 or 3 years down the line. And then people are asking why. That's my view. The special taxing districts, those are good ideas too. They have to be voter approved, is my understanding. They'd be beneficial when it comes to minimizing or controlling costs going forward. They don't solve your problem today. They don't solve your problem for fiscal year 24 or 25 or 26. But so that's what you really got to be looking at. And I will give you compliments too, because you deserve them. Okay. Every year that this Board of Supervisors has been able to, it has reduced property taxes. Every single year. None of you are tax and spenders. And every year that you could responsibly do that, you have done that. And I think that's reason to take pride in your stewardship of Mojave County, Arizona. Also, you have addressed, in my opinion, critical employee issues. You have stepped up to the plate, and in a large degree, you've treated Mojave County employees like business people would treat their employees, and you've compensated them as the market demands. And that's good. It's good for morale. It's good for our employees going forward. It also, to some degree, is self-interested because you're dealing with the market realities, and if you don't do that, you lose employees. And then services fall, and people who are calling 911, if it's in the sheriff's department, gets an extremely delayed response time, or court staff fade. Planning and zoning employees, public development employees, community development employees go work in the private sector, and you're not delivering the roads, the law enforcement, the legal services that we desperately need in Mojave County, Arizona, and we will continue to need in Mojave County, Arizona, as our population increases. My understanding is looking at WACOG numbers in June of 2022, we had 220,000 in population. For a few years before that, we've been increasing at roughly 4,000 or so every year. So by June of 2023, their numbers should indicate we're at 224. And that clock is just going to keep on ticking as people flee California and people come from other areas, or people who own second homes. Half my subdivision is second homes, it seems like, and more of those second homes are being occupied now full time as people retire from the areas that they currently come from, and they're going to demand services. So I hope I explained the court asks a bit more. I hope I showed that we're really not being brazen, that we're trying to be team players, and we're willing to take whatever suggestions you might be willing to give to us. But I would suggest to the board that you have some difficult decisions ahead of you. And I think that those decisions, if you're not going to hide the problem, are going to have to include tax increases. But that's just my perspective. You're free to disregard it, and I know you folks probably will. You're strong-willed, smart guys and ladies, and you'll do what you will. But I hope that you take my comments and Attorney Matt Smith's comments and county administration comments on board. I'm ready to answer any questions that you might have. I'd be glad to do that.
Questions for Judge Moss?
Can I make one more observation?
Judge Moss, go ahead.
I was sitting here on Monday, I tend to sit in that back corner, way up there, out of the way, out of sight, out of mind. And I will say, I mentioned to Mr. Anderson, who's our court administrator, that I'm glad I don't have your job anymore. I'm just glad. There's a lot of abuse that gets inflicted upon you that I did not experience during my 5 or 6 years of tenure. There's been a change in demeanors, and I'm very, very sorry that you have to deal with that. There's a way of saying that there's ways of disagreeing with people, which are civil and polite, and doesn't have to be verbally abusive. The very first thing they teach you in law school is how to say no. The second thing they teach you in law school is you get a lot more with honey than you do with vinegar, which is something everyone's grandmother should be reminding them of. But I'll put that out there. So you have my condolences about some things I've observed in the administration of your duties.
Thank you for your comments this morning, Judge Moss. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Kip, it's nice to see you as always as well. Thank you. We'll move to the portion of our agenda where we provide the opportunity to our department heads. Are there any department heads that would wish to come up to the podium and address the board? I'll ask one last time. Any department heads want to come down?
Going once.
I think they're scared of Ron. All right, we'll check that off. We'll move to the portion of our agenda that is the board discussion with staff. Supervisor Angus.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody for showing up and presenting this budget to us. And Supervisor Johnson said very early on today that, we were not presented the balanced budget that we were. And I think this is what happened last year as well. And what happened last year is by the time we got to the tentative budget, we were basically at square one. And we were sort of behind. And I hope that's not what's going to happen this year. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Supervisor. Any other comments? Hearing none, I believe that will conclude our agenda this morning. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. We look forward to the next step.